we're good to go.
Good morning. My name is Jim Spencer. I'm with the Bluefield, West Virginia Economic Development Authority, and we'd like to welcome you, the ones in person this morning, the ones attending by Zoom, to Cybersecurity 101. This is part of the series of training programs that we offer. We've done everything from time management to marketing to other Canva class, different things like that to try to help small business. And with the COVID-19, many businesses are being forced to do more online. And I think never has been in my lifetime more important for cybersecurity, for not only your personal information, but your business information and protecting that, whether it be your personal information with your home, things that you do and others. We need to be careful today because identity theft and other things is very important. You can have your social media hacked and things like that. So we're very proud this morning to be partnering with the Small Business Development Center. Special thanks to Deborah Martin, Steve Johnson, and Harold Patterson, who's with us this morning, for the things that they do. And hopefully, Steve, maybe join us later in the program to talk about their SME program and other things that the SBDC does. They are a great partner. We tag team on a lot of projects, whether it be planning for your business or whatever it may be, seeking potential financing. Harold and I work, and our team here work very closely on projects. So if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know. All the services we do are free. We've got an entrepreneurial boot camp and other things that you can find on our mybluefield.org website. So this morning, it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Baker with BrainWave Consulting. We appreciate him and again, the SBDC for sponsoring this event. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're here to talk about Cybersecurity 101. We're going to try and get through a lot of stuff. There are a lot of things that you have to look at from a cybersecurity standpoint, but we're going to try and make this meaningful to everyone. Now, eventually, you want your organization to be here. You want your organization to be in a place where it can perform a gap analysis so you understand what your security risks are, that you can develop a security architecture, that you can implement it, that you can get everybody on your team in a culture of security so that they're always thinking about it. And then, you want to automate as much as possible. The more manual things you're doing, the more room there is for error. And you want to continue to monitor your security progress. But that takes time to get there, right? And that includes discussions like these: artificial intelligence and threat intelligence and threat modeling and advanced persistent threats, which you may hear about when you listen to different breaches that occur online, and intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. These are deep discussions that are all part of the cybersecurity landscape. But as a small business owner and maybe someone that has been focused on just delivering the services that you provide today, this is not the kind of stuff that you are familiar with. And you probably were afraid that we were going to dive into some of these things today, but we're not. Today's goals are a little bit more straightforward, a little bit simpler. We're going to provide an overview of the challenges that you're going to face as a small business today. And we're going to provide some introductory steps that business owners can take to improve their online security, right? Something to get you started. I want you to have some practical steps today that you can implement and begin to see real benefits. And we're going to have a list of resources at the end that that covers what we're discussing, right? There is no such thing as a free lunch. And this diagram, I've used this diagram for a number of years. And it's something that you always want to bear in mind as you think about cybersecurity and technology in general. Those 3 points that you see: cheap, fast, and secure. Many people will try and sell you the fact that they have a solution that covers all 3 bases. That is very, very, very extremely rare. Generally, you get to pick 2 of those things. You get to decide if you're going to spend less money and get something fast. It probably won't be secure. You get to decide if you're going to spend something, you're going to get something that's fast and it's secure, probably not going to be cheap, right? You can get cheap and secure, but it may not be fast. And so you have to understand, when you're deciding in security, what you're going to do for your business, what you're going to do for your organization, what you're going to do at home, you have to decide on these principles. Am I going to spend some money as a way to do it? Am I going to try to build it myself as a way to do it? These are considerations. Here are some basic cybersecurity facts, and this applies to small businesses, especially in the post-COVID era. If you're on the internet in any way, you are open to cybersecurity attacks. It doesn't matter that your business is not a bank or financial in nature. If you're connected to the internet, people can reach you, and they can reach you for good or for evil. And even if your organization doesn't necessarily have direct financial ties, you're probably connected to somebody else that does. You may be providing services for a larger organization that people want to attack. So you have to protect yourself on the internet, because in many cases, people don't know what the nature of your business is until they've broken into it, right? So it doesn't matter that you're saying, hey, we don't generate a lot of money, or we don't have that kind of a thing going on here. They won't know that for sure until they break into it. Cybersecurity is not just about tools. We're going to focus a little bit on tools today, but also a little bit on process. People, process, and tools are the key considerations for cybersecurity, okay? That's what you have to pay attention to. Cybersecurity is about how you live and behave. It's not just about what you buy. It's not what you install. You can't just buy something, never think about it again, and consider yourself secure. That's not really how it's going to work. It's about how you behave, decisions you make, things you implement, processes you implement. Your goal at the end of the day is to minimize risk. There is no point where you can say, oh yes, I am perfectly secure, because that's not how it works. It's all about threats that you face, how much you're going to spend to minimize those threats, the risk to you associated with those threats, and deciding what's important and what's not important, right? You're not necessarily going to encrypt every piece of data that comes your way. You're not necessarily going to put two-factor authentication on every device that you own, because you need to balance the cost of protecting yourself against the cost of loss, okay? Don't spend $1 million to solve a $10,000 problem, right? That's a bad use of resources. Education and awareness for yourself and for your employees is always important. It's essential to good security. And poor security always costs you more than you think. A lot of times people look at the strict dollar value. If I own something that is $10,000 and somebody steals it, that's a $10,000 loss, but it's not. It's really a larger loss. There may be reputational damage. People may feel a certain way about the fact that you lost data or lost a particular asset, and that might affect how they decide to do business with you. There may be insurance costs that come into play, so you need to understand that. When you're thinking about security, complexity works against security, right? If any of you are familiar with cartoons, you remember that Wile E. Coyote was always trying to get the Roadrunner, and he was always building very elaborate systems that didn't work out the way that he expected that they would. This is true oftentimes, that the more complex your system is, or the more complex the solution you try to put in place to protect yourself, the more, the worse your security ends up being. Now, early on, I talked about fast, cheap, and secure. That does not mean that if you spend a ton of money, you are safer than if you don't. There are trade-offs all the way around. Spending intelligently is more important than simply spending, okay? Good security is practical at the end of the day. Now we're gonna look, since we're dealing with cybersecurity basics and we're trying to help you understand them, we're gonna talk about a couple of things that will not dominate the rest of the presentation, but risk management. Cybersecurity is part of the whole risk management discipline. You're basically looking at your business and you're saying, I have these business risks, I have these technology risks, and this is what I'm going to do to minimize their effect on me. It's all about risk management. You have to decide that there's a chance that someone will steal from my store. There's a chance that someone will try to break into my website. There's a chance that I'm going to open an email that is damaging. And you have to decide what, how likely is one of these events and how easy is it to protect against that event, right? Should I put cameras in my store? Will they act as a deterrent? Will they help me if there's a problem? Those are the kinds of things that you decide in risk management. And every business, regardless of the size, has some risk management they have to deal with. People. Technology will get you far, but people make things work or not. If you have good staff and conscientious staff and you educate them about security concerns, they will compensate in many cases for a lack of totally effective technology. They can make up for bad technology or processes. They can also undermine good ones, right? Bad people can undermine the greatest technology and the greatest processes. The one important thing that I want us to focus on today that will be a part of the rest of this presentation. As a small business owner, you probably wear many hats. You probably do your own, you may not have a separate accounting department. You may be managing your own accounts. You may be doing your financials. When you're in those different modes, when you're in your sales mode versus your accounting mode, your accounts receivable, et cetera, you need to behave differently, right? Don't use one account for everything that you do if you're operating as 2 or 3 people, right? Bear that in mind, and we'll give you some practical things to consider afterwards. Trust but verify. That's always important. Don't take things for granted. Whenever you see something that's sort of out of place, verify that it is the way that it should be. Talk about policies and procedures. Whatever steps you take, especially as a small business, aim for practical. Whatever you do, document it. Make it simple so someone else could follow it. And periodically look at what you've done, look at what you've written, look at what you've documented, look at the procedures you have, and make sure, are they the same for my business? Have threats changed that necessitate a change of documentation? Has my business model changed, which necessitates a change of documentation? Make sure that the things you're doing make sense for what you're going about. And then tools and technology. In a general sense, again, these are foundational concepts. Be sure that when you purchase, install, decide to deploy some sort of a tool, make sure that your tool is supporting the objective you have in mind, and don't necessarily change your whole objective to fit the tool, right? Make sure that you're using a hammer because that's what you need to accomplish your mission. And don't just change your whole process around to using hammers because that's what's laying about. And you're like, well, I've got a hammer, so I'm going to hammer in this screw, and I'm going to hammer in the nail, and I'm going to hammer whatever I have. I'm just going to hammer it because I got a hammer. Your tools should be, you should select the right tools for the objectives that you have and not just change your objectives around to match the tools, okay? Some of the most important tools you're going to pay attention to as a small business are tools related to account management, password management, authentication. And we're going to show you some things there. Antivirus and anti-malware, both on your desktop, laptop, but also your mobile. We don't pay enough attention to mobile. And then you want things that can monitor. That it's the same principle as why we have cameras in stores and workplaces, because you might not be able to prevent everything, but you certainly want to know what happened and understand what the scope is. Now I'm going to make another point here as I start to get into some of the practical things. Throughout the rest of this slide, as you see different product names, you're going to see certain things that are bolded. And the reason that I'm bolding them is they are essentially a recommendation. They are not the only products or tools or services you can use. They are not. I'm not suggesting that. You can certainly use other tools, and when we get to the final page where there's some recommendations, you'll see that there are a list of tools or a list of products that are compared to one another that you can look at. But I'm comfortable with presenting the specific tools that I mentioned because I have experience with them. I've used them. In some cases, I resell them. And so I know that they work. I've used them for, 2, 5, 10 years in some cases. I know that they work. I know that they'll be effective. I know that if you use them, you're likely to get really good results from them. But they're not the only tools. I don't want to pretend that they're the only things that you could do to get the results that we're discussing here. Okay. Get good guidance. I'm putting this first because at the end of the day, you're not going to necessarily understand at a deep level every single thing about security. It doesn't matter what size your organization is, right? The larger organizations end up hiring security people or using security services. Definitely get good guidance. Even if it's just guidance, even if you're going to go it alone in terms of implementing things, make sure you speak to somebody who understands, not just technology, but cybersecurity, okay? Because technology knowledge and understanding is important in how these things all go together, but understanding what risks are and someone who understands your business, because cybersecurity in a general sense, right? If someone walks up to me right now and says, what antivirus should I get? Or how should I protect my business? I can't and won't answer them until I say to them, what is your business exactly? What do you do in your business? How do you operate? Are you operating out of a home? Are you operating in a workplace? Describe your business to me, because the way in which that business will be protected has a lot to do with how that business runs. Okay, so you have to tell me how it runs before I can tell you how to protect it. So make sure when you're speaking to someone that you're not just taking generic guidance that can't be more specific. I'm going to give you some generic guidance today, that things that you're going to be able to tailor, things that are going to give you some good results. But as you get more in depth in what you're trying to protect, you need more in depth. That person that you're getting guidance from needs more information about your business and how it operates, okay? And not every cybersecurity problem can be solved by tools or technology. Sometimes you have to implement a process with that technology or just a process in general. And we're going to have some examples of that. So that's just emphasize, speak to more than one person, right? Frame of reference, speak to 2 or 3 people. Different people are going to ask you different questions. You're going to get a different feel. Speak to more than one person before you decide on settling for a person. Okay, that's the key thing. Make sure you speak to someone who can help you. Security awareness training. This is a very critical piece. I've implemented this security awareness training as an employee and as a consultant at a number of different places, and it always helps to improve the overall security posture because it helps people understand the ways in which their behavior helps or hinders security. And so there are different solutions. One here listed is Know Before. There are different solutions, and those solutions will educate people about what cybersecurity is online, how it affects you from an online perspective, password management, et cetera. Doesn't take a lot of time, very educational. They'll give you little quizzes and tests to help the information stick. And it leads you to a place where you and your employees are making better decisions about where you go on the internet, whether or not your machine is protected, when you see email that's kind of suspicious, identifying suspicious email and how you behave in relation to that. Very important, does not use up a lot of time, totally valuable. And within a few months, you'll see that your team is just better about how they operate, which leads to a much better outcome for you. There's a link here to the NIST has a small business cybersecurity resource. It will also be listed at the end. Very worthy place that includes free training as well as other things of that sort. Don't share accounts. Don't share accounts. Every time a breach notification comes out, what we find out is that people are still sharing accounts. Do not share accounts across systems. This means, and we're going to use the term credentials, which means account password combination. So your credential would be your name or your email address or your username plus your password. That's what a credential is. Don't share credentials across systems. Now, a lot of systems are going to use your email address as part of the credential. So absolutely do not use the same email address and password combination at your e-commerce site and your banking and your social media and this other website where you get news. Don't do that. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Okay. It's bad even if you have 2 or 3 bank accounts across different banks and you use the same account name and password with just the banks. That would be bad. But when you do that across other systems as well, it's terrible because people will break into one of those systems. And when they get into one of those systems, they'll try those same password, email, username and password combinations across other systems. And when they do that, they will be able to access something that's more critical than the place where you didn't care about it. Okay, so do not share account credentials across systems. It's still done far too much. Please don't do it. If you have any that are like that now, go through and change the passwords. Don't share accounts across people. So if you have a system at work, now this one is admittedly difficult because sometimes a service that you're using doesn't allow you to have multiple users. They just give you one username and password, like the place where you go to buy your stamps, right? They may not give you 3 or 4 accounts. You may not be able to make other accounts. So there's just one account that's there. Okay. And maybe 2 people are responsible for buying stamps or whatever it is, the service that's being discussed. As much as possible, don't share accounts across people. If you must do it, because of like an example that I just gave, make sure that that's a strong account, right? Not a flimsy username and password. Make sure that no one who's using that is using that combination for any other service. And if multi-factor authentication is available, then by all means try to do it, because it's the same principle again. The more an account gets used in places where, in multiple places, the more likely one of them will be broken into. Now, use a password credential manager. Why do we say that? Because you're probably already thinking, oh my goodness, I have all these accounts. How am I going to manage all of these and remember them? I have.
Hey, Andrew?
Yes.
I have a question, actually.
Okay.
Do you have a piece of advice for instance, our team uses, what's the example? We use like FlipSnack, which is like how we host our online publications and stuff. And they don't have an option for like multiple users to be part of a team. How would you recommend like our employees using like the same account by logging in with the same credentials? Is that the best way to go about it, or?
Well, unfortunately, it's the only way to go about it, unless the vendor will, unless the vendor offers, multi-factor authentication, or they support multiple users. In a case like that, you want to use a very strong password, and then whenever there's a staff change, you'll need to change that password, right? So if there are 4 of you that use that, and one person retires, changes jobs, whatever the case is, whether it was firing or just a normal transition, you'll need to change the password for everyone, because you don't want someone who's no longer part of the organization to have access to a resource that is part of the organization.
That's an excellent point. Thank you so much.
Right. And that's why password managers come in handy, right? I probably have thousands of passwords that I manage at this point. It's definitely thousands. And I don't memorize any of those things. I try to make the longest possible passwords and I stick them in my password manager. And if you have a really good password manager, it will allow you to use it at a website right? So password managers like Dashlane and LastPass, they'll allow you to pull it from as you go to the site or as you use the technology in-house, you can copy and paste, or it will automatically input the passwords. So you're not required to memorize them. And that takes away the burden of managing lots and lots and lots of passwords. You do have to pay attention to the password manager, because if you lose control of that, then someone now has access not only to all of your credentials, but they know what they belong to, right? So securing a password manager is vital. Don't use a tiny password on that. Don't say, oh, I have to go into this regularly, so I'm just going to make it, Andrew123 ... right? Don't do that, right? Use a strong password on your password manager, because it's securing every other credential that you have, right?
Hey, Andrew, I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about like Google Chrome storing passwords?
Good question. In 2021, it's a good idea. It's okay. They used to be weak. They used to be very weak. And I'm not just saying Chrome, I should say browsers. Browsers used to be very poor at storing passwords. But as operating systems underlying them became better at managing secrets, that's what they're called, credentials, at managing secrets, the browsers tie into the operating system. It doesn't matter whether you're on running a Mac, whether you're on a Windows machine or a Linux machine. Ultimately, the browser is tying into the underlying secrets management of the OS. So it is very secure if you use your browser. The problem with the browser, if you do use the browser, is that it will only be in that browser. Otherwise, you then have to do sharing at the browser level. You have to make your browser sync with all of the instances if you have more than one machine that you are using as an individual, right? So you have to bear that in mind. If you do use the browser, it won't be centralized. It'll be local to that specific browser. And you can make it shared because Firefox will do it and Chrome will do it, and all of the Chrome derivative browsers and Microsoft Edge will do it. But then you have to share. You have to make sure that you're linking there, and you have to understand what that implies. Yes, you'll get your favorites over to all of your other browsers, but your passwords will also traverse those browsers too. So make sure you feel comfortable about which browser you're using and the fact that they're going to have access to all of those passwords. But it's not unsafe at all if in terms of that question. Okay, so use different services. Using a password manager will help you to do that. Default credentials, what does this mean? Well, when you buy a device, especially routers and Wi-Fi devices, they all come with some default: admin password, admin no password, whatever they come with, whatever the defaults are, change them. Don't just accept the defaults. Okay, because if you do a Google search for product name, default password, you'll find that everybody on the internet knows what the default password is for that. Change it. As soon as you go to install your device, change its default username. Sometimes you can't change the username. You can only change the password. If you can do both, right? If you can do both, do both. But yeah, username and password, change them. When you get an online application, change whatever there's usually a default admin account in there. Change its credentials. Save those credentials in your password manager. When you're setting up accounts, don't use things that can easily be determined. Your birthday, where you've lived, family members, pets, and especially let's take this default credential thing to an extra level here. On social media, please, if you do nothing else, if you only do this one thing, I will consider it a win. On social media, people are going to send you those stuff that either say, here's how I know that you're my friend, because you'll cut and paste this thing here. That's one group of them. The other one is, Who was president when you were in 6th grade? There'll be all of these interesting questions that ask you, that are essentially asking you for details about where you've lived, how old you are. They're just backhanded questions about your private information. Don't play those games. Those things get harvested and can be used for identity theft in a very subtle way. Because when you indicate where you were during Woodstock, and when you indicate where you were during some major event, you're giving people your age, your location, things that you might put as a password or as an answer to something. In fact, I'm going to add this, which I forgot to put in the slide, but I'm going to say this. I do not use actual answers. You know, when you go to a website and they say, they ask you one of those questions because they say, here are the 3 questions to verify the account. Your 3 extra questions that we're going to ask you, not just your password. We're going to say, what was your first car? And who was your first pet? And where did you get your first job? And all those kinds of things. I answer all of those with fictitious answers, which I store in my password credential manager. I don't answer them with real answers. I answer them with fake answers that are specific to those places, okay? Because it's not strictly, they are not checking your answer for its legitimacy. They're just trying to make sure that when they ask you the question again, you give them the same answer you gave them the first time. And so that's what I do. I store it in the password manager so that when they come up and say, hey, it's time for your password change or whatever, we're trying to verify that you are who you are. Where was your first job? It's wherever I said it was and saved it in the password manager. I don't use real info because if they have a breach, that info adds to my identity theft risk if it's real info. If they have fake info, it doesn't mean anything to me. Right? Think about that carefully. If someone gets your, let's say you're doing everything else that we spoke about, you're using an individual username and password at, bankusa.com, okay? And they get broken into. Well, that username and password was unique anyway. You're only using it there, so whatever. But if they also have, where was your first this and where was your first that and what was your, and they have that info is going to be valid because other people are asking you similar questions and you probably answered it the same everywhere. So now you're at a risk because they ended up with some data that isn't unique. So I make sure that all the data that they have is unique, right? Don't use non-unique data when you can avoid it. Obviously, there are times where you have to give actual data as part of a process. That's fine. But if it's not there for legitimacy, if it's just there to get back an answer that they want to see, then pursue it differently. Use multi-factor authentication. Okay. Multi-factor authentication, a lot of times people feel it's painful. Identity theft is far more painful, let me assure you. So don't end up there. I've helped a number of people with identity theft and all of them insist that they would have been better off using multi-factor or using separate passwords, right? Because the pain that they're going through at that moment is worse than what they thought they were going through by the multi-factor. Use it. Just bear in mind that since you're using your device for multi-factor, the security of your mobile device is paramount. Okay, make sure you have something like an AVG or Lookout Mobile Security. Make sure that your default accounts for services are changed. Make sure you lock out the device, right? If your device is two-factor, it has access to all of these other resources on it. Don't leave it to where someone, if you leave it in a place and someone picks it up, that they could get right into your things. Don't do that. Support biometrics if it's available. Make sure your screen locks automatically. Your mobile device is one of your most important assets. Please take care of it. Now, here's what we're talking about: processes, right? If you are running your own business and you have something that you hook up to, you need to connect to your bank and your other financial institution, if you have employees and you have a process for handling payroll, buy one more machine, preferably a stationary one, a desktop. Buy one more machine, make that machine be the only machine you do that work on. Do not, under any circumstance, browse your social media from that machine. Have that machine in an office somewhere and let that machine do the only thing, do that work. If you can't do that, right? If you can't do that for whatever reason, then choose a browser on your machine, install a browser, different browser, and on that browser, whichever one you pick, it doesn't matter which one, it just has to be different from the ones you use normally. So if you're a Chrome person, then use Firefox for the financial stuff only, and never open up anything that is non-financial anywhere else. You know, in the Firefox one, and don't open up the financial stuff in the Chrome one. Okay, if you're going to do it that way. But I would recommend highly that you pick an inexpensive desktop system that all of the financial stuff goes to and gets dealt with. You might have to put mail on it so that you can get mail to and from it, but restrict access to that so that on that machine, there's no chance that bad software is going to interfere with your access, that some sort of a breach involving social media or some other application will create a problem for you. Keep your financial system safe, because big companies run into these risks all the time, but big companies have enough money to not, to survive that. Small companies often cannot survive that. Okay, so this involves processes. In fact, here's the second half of this. There's this thing called BEC, Business Email Compromise. It's also known as CEO fraud phishing. It's where you get this email that's supposedly from your CEO to your chief financial officer or your accountant or whoever's managing the money that says, oh, listen, we got through this deal or whatever, send some money here, wire some money there, whatever the case is. Bigger companies face this, right? You don't see, these are usually targeted attacks and bigger companies, but I've worked for businesses that have had 100 or less employees that have been targeted by this, okay? And in one case, they got lucky because the way in which the email was done, their bank was suspicious when they went to make the transaction and called them on it, right? So, if you have a good financial institution, it might be helpful, but the idea here is make sure that as the business owner, whoever else is involved with the money, that you guys have a protocol for verifying strange stuff. If you get something, an email that says, hey, hurry up and do X, call somebody. Just dial up their phone number and say, Bob, did you just send me an email? Yeah, what was it about? Verify, have a process in place that makes sure you don't make the wrong mistake here. Because as a small business, you will almost certainly not survive having half of your money that should have gone to payroll end up someplace else, right? Don't do it. And implement a good spam filtering service on top of that, because some of those things will get caught on the outside. The more things that fail to make it into your organization, the less your people can be tempted or tricked. Good physical security. This is a cybersecurity presentation, but there is a basic premise that if you do not have good physical security, you do not have good digital or cybersecurity. So if you're in a shared office space, you and another company, make sure that your critical assets are in a protected, that they're protected, that there's a separation between the offices, that you have a locked area, that your networking equipment or this other equipment is in a place that can be protected. You want to make sure that things can be secured, because if I can get into the area where your wireless router is or your internet connection is, and I can plug into it or join your Wi-Fi network, well, I'm in your network and I can do things that you probably didn't want to have done, okay? Good security hygiene. Make sure you back up your data. There are things about ransomware. We're not tackling ransomware specifically today. We are going to make an attempt to do it in the 102 class, but we are not dealing with ransomware specifically. We're trying to get some fundamentals in there first. Make sure that you have your data backed up and test that periodically. There are a lot of times where you think you're backing up something and you're not. I've had 2 incidents in the last 12 months where something happened and data I thought was being backed up in a certain place wasn't there. Now I had multiple backups, so what I lost was one of the places where I thought data was backed up wasn't, but the other places were. So it's just a reminder, verify everything. Use antivirus or anti-malware products on your desktops and laptops. Doesn't matter what operating system. A lot of people feel like the Mac is more secure, or Linux, whatever. People are getting attacked by all of the mechanisms. The whichever operating system you have is not automatically bulletproof versus a different one. Okay, get software that will help you there, and especially for small business, get cloud managed software as opposed to you having to check each and every machine. Because when you're busy in a small place, you're not going to remember to check all of those things. And someone could be getting a lot of alerts locally and no one knows about it. Get it in a central place where it can be checked on in a central place and you can see what the trend is and understand whether or not things are happening to you. Keep your hardware and software up to date, your operating system. Make sure it's patched, the applications you use, make sure they're patched. Any drivers or firmware updates for your routers and firewalls and Wi-Fi devices, make sure those things are happening, right? Because they get fixed not just for features, but also for security reasons. And there are so many times that breaches occur because something had come out in 2019 that no one had put into effect in 2021, and it finally gets attacked. The other thing as a small business owner, well, this last thing, it doesn't matter the size of your business. The process, all of these things that we're discussing, all of this kind of vigilance that you need to maintain, do the same thing on your home systems, right? Just remember, you may be connecting, if you're a small business and you're operating out of home, your home business, your home network is essentially your work network. You really have to pay attention to that. But a lot of people treat their home network kind of loosely, but then they use that machine to connect to their work network, maybe when they're connecting remotely and things of that sort. You're just dragging the problem around, right? Apply good security hygiene at home as well as at work, right? It's a mindset. So once you get into that mindset, just apply it everywhere where you're using technology. Now, if you're hosting a website, especially if it's e-commerce.
Andrew?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, we have a question from the audience in here.
Okay.
How do you feel about the Norton Security for small business? Did I ask that correctly?
Yes. So Norton, so I'll tell you this, Norton Security, I'm not a big fan of the Norton tools. I remember Norton way back in the day. It used to be a lot better. I'm not a particular fan of the Norton or the McAfee products in particular. They try to do a lot. They are what I would consider to be bloatware in many cases. The fact that they come with the, in fact, let me slide over. I'm going to come back to 13, but 14. Don't rely on default ISP security, right? So your internet service provider probably gives you some stuff. And the same thing with your desktop. When you buy your desktop or laptop, it'll come with some tools. I almost always scrap the ones they come with. Now, is it better than having nothing? In most cases, it is better than having nothing. But I typically scrap the things that come with the PC or that come bundled, because the reason they get into those bundles is because they're cheaper and not as useful, in my professional opinion, right? I've dealt with so many machines where Norton created slowdowns or was blocking things, and it was really hard to understand or remove, and so it was a problem. So I'm not a fan of the Norton stuff. I'm not a fan of today's Norton stuff. And I say today is in the last decade. Same thing for McAfee, not a fan of those. I would in fact install some of the free products like Avast or AVG ahead of the paid Norton and McAfee stuff, right? So that's the answer to that question. If you have it, as opposed to having nothing, yeah, you're better off than having nothing. But I've found that too many times where they've slowed machines down. And my sister and I have a running joke when she gets a laptop. She's like, Andrew, I'm having a problem with such and such. I'm like, are you using Norton? Ah, no, I got rid of that already. Right. So that's how I feel about it. That's been my experience.
Yeah, Andrew, we actually have another question. It's a lot of people say Macs don't get viruses. Is that true? And is Microsoft Security that comes with the Windows system good enough for home? So it's kind of a two-part question.
Yes,
if you want to reread it again, it is in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is a good question, and I'm definitely familiar with it. Macs do get viruses. They do not get them to the level that Windows gets them, and there are two reasons for that. One, historically, Windows machines were less secure than Macs. That's one. Two, Windows machines dominate Mac machines in terms of total installed base, probably by a factor of 50 to 1 at this point. So if you're an attacker, who are you going to attack more? You're going to attempt to break into the places where there are more options to break into. So that's part of the discrepancy and why we see so much in terms of security, malware protection for Windows machines versus Macs. But I can point to several news articles within the last few months that show that Macs get hit and that Linux machines also get hit from malware. So don't take it for granted. Regardless of the platform, there are anti-malware vendors that operate on all three of those platforms for a reason. I would get it. It's better to be safe than sorry, and it does not cost so much that you should avoid doing it. And that's the next question. The next part of the question was the default stuff. Microsoft has made great strides in their default tools. If you were stuck, I say it that way, if you were stuck with using only Microsoft Defender, you would not actually be in a bad place. Microsoft Defender is a legitimate anti-malware tool. It doesn't have as many features unless you're in a more enterprise environment. It offers more features at that level. There's an upgrade to it, but it's effective and it's the default. It will run from the time you install your Windows machine, unless you install another antiviral product, then it will turn Defender off. That's how, that's the balance that they work on. When it goes on, Defender will go off or stay in the background and only do certain kinds of checks. But yes, by default, Microsoft Defender is suitable for a system. If you don't have anything else, that's not a bad place to be. But I do recommend some of these other things because their central management is better and they're a little bit more flexible with things like ransomware and stuff of that sort, where they will identify threats, not just from signatures, but also because of behavior. Okay. Cloudflare is an interesting product. You have another question?
Nope, just thanking you for answering that. It was a great explanation.
Okay, awesome. You're welcome. Cloudflare is an interesting product. There are other competitors to Cloudflare, but most of them are not free. Cloudflare offers a free version of their service that you can use to front end your website, which means all traffic will come to it before it goes to your website. That helps with denial of service attacks. It helps with certain kinds of malware against your website. It can be a replacement for DNS services. It is effective. I use it on all of my websites, and the free version is very effective. You can get even more stuff if you pay into it. Definitely put your site behind something like that. If you're using a WordPress site, there are other similar tools that you can use. I am using some WordPress sites, but I have them behind Cloudflare. That's, for me, that combination is better and more flexible. Do that to protect your site from the typical hacker attacks that we tend to think of when we speak about hacker attacks, right? Typical attacks. The security, again, a lot of times people will get, if they're using whatever the provider is, we're in West Virginia, so you have any of the cable providers, you have, Sudden Link and Chantel, whoever the providers are, they'll give you a router or a wireless device. You're running a business, consider putting a real firewall ahead of those devices or behind them. It depends on how you have to line it up from a technical standpoint. Consider putting a real device there. It'll cost you some money. Yes, it does cost you some more money, but the level of protection is like night and day. And you can do things like VPN, firewalls. You can control who gets to your access to your devices, and you can manage it remotely. Definitely consider doing that. You'll probably need to speak to someone. This is not something you'll just buy and put in. That will be a little bit more involved, but consider moving in that direction. And the last of the big items is consider cybersecurity insurance. Talk to whoever you get your property or business insurance from and see if there might be an insurance policy that's appropriate for your line of business and what you're trying to do, that if in case you have a breach, or ransomware, whatever it is that ends up happening, that you have a means of recovering from that, and you don't just, your business doesn't fold because you had no options there. Speak to someone that will be able to guide you intelligently in that. And again, as with everything else, speak to 2 or 3 people. I mean, obviously, if you have a particular insurance provider, they can help, but you're not obligated to get it from your existing insurance provider. It may make sense to get it from someone who specializes in that. Definitely consider that as a small business for the risks that you have. Let's see. And so here's what you want to do. You want to look at where your business is today. This is basically what of the things that we discussed, you want to look at, where am I today? Which things should I change? Prioritize which things to fix. Don't just jump on and try to fix everything at once. That's stressful. Make changes in a measured way, in a manageable way. So you say, hey, this social media thing, let me do that. Or, hey, let me just buy a machine and do this for my financials. Let me do a little research on these password credential managers and implement that. Figure out what to do, pick one of them, get used to it, make sure that it's working for you, then go on to the next thing, right? Don't try to cram it all at once. You don't have to do that, but make take some steps and make progress towards improving your security posture, okay? Just a reminder, no free lunch. So as you make your decisions, some places you're going to want to spend, you may not be able to spend, but just understand what the caveats are, okay? And here's the list of resources that I highlighted. I bolded the first one because it's the small business resource. The second one has a lot more things. It's also from NIST, but the first one is more targeted to this audience. So you'll probably want to look at that one and then go to the others and look at that second link last. We target email security, website protection, just basically all of the high points that we discussed here today. Okay, so this resource will be available. I guess everyone will be able to get a chance to look at that. So my contact info is here if we have any questions.
Andrew, if you would want to send me your slide deck or that last slide, I can include that. Everyone who registers will get a email with the link to watch this afterwards, and I can include your slide deck as well.
Okay.
Steve Johnson with the SBDC is on, and he wanted to make a couple remarks if that was all right with you.
Yes, it is.
So I'm going to invite Steve. If you want to unmute, you're welcome to join us.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Steve Johnson. Andrew, thanks for coming on and giving me a couple of minutes here. I'm the Deputy Director of the Small Business Development Center, and we're very proud to say that Andrew is one of our subject matter experts in the cybersecurity realm, of course. Thank you so much for doing that. I learned something every time I talk to you, sir. Appreciate that. I wanted to just take just a minute. I know we're running out of time. Andrew and more than a dozen other subject matter experts are part of a program that the West Virginia Small Business Development Center is doing for CARES recovery. We did get some CARES Act recovery funds, and with that, we have hired several subject matter experts of Andrew's caliber to help small businesses with a really wide range of business needs, all based on recovering or resiliency for when something else happens, which it always does. One of the big things, of course, is cybersecurity and working from home and e-commerce and all the things that he's talked about today. But there's also a marketing. We have several marketing people on. That's been a real need, especially website development, website search engine optimization, e-commerce, of course. There's succession planning. If you've had enough of this crazy stuff and want out, or you're looking to maybe buy up some people who are retiring. There's just a really large realm of stuff that we as SBDC have always done to some extent, but we just really upped our game and added some real meat and potatoes type expertise to our stable of coaches. How do you do this, and what's the cost? Good news is it's free. We're not supposed to say free because it's already paid for, so I guess it's no charge. But it is a CARES Act funded that trickled down from the CARES Act that came through West Virginia. So there's no charge for this. How do you access it? That's easy. You contact SBDC. Specifically, you can call Harold Patterson. Sure, a lot of you know Harold down Bluefield and does a lot of stuff with Jim and the EDA down there. Harold can sign you up to be a client with SBDC. Once you do that, you sit down with Harold and kind of discuss what your needs are. We assess that a little bit, and then put you out kind of an RFQ to our stable of subject matter experts and see who can help and where you might fit in their level of expertise. Andrew would be one of them. So if you would like to get more of what you've heard from Andrew today, you have some projects or something that you specifically need in the cybersecurity realm, contact Harold. He can get you set up with Andrew, or if you have other needs, that's great too. We're happy to set you up with that as well. So hopefully, Harold, maybe you could put your contact information in the chat. I'm sure Jim and you guys can send that out to those who have participated. So I'll let you go. It looks like I'm out of time. I'm trying to be respectful of that. Thank you guys for a few minutes of your time, and I'll turn it back over to you, Savannah. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to include Harold's contact information in the email that we'll send out after the class so people can access that way. Just so for you folks know, Andrew will be joining us again on June 30th for Cybersecurity 102, where we're going to dive even deeper into all of this stuff and even some different stuff. So thank you all for joining us. I'm going to end the recording now.